Hey guys, Poro here, this time with the final video I'll post covering MSI 2024. Now that the tournament is over, I want to make a reflection video where I go over my thoughts on the tournament as a whole. I'll go over which players I thought overperformed or underperformed, how my team predictions stacked up, and just my general experience overall. This was my first time covering an international tournament live from start to finish, minus a few issues here and there, and I can start by talking about that. Covering MSI overall was a blast. Being able to watch the tournament live with a small pocket of my community was awesome, and I was able to get invested in many of the series and players way more than I've ever done before. Live viewing the entire tournament was definitely a big decision for me, and I'm glad I did it. One thing I will say though is that live viewing this tournament from North America was very exhausting. My sleep schedule was absolutely destroyed on multiple occasions, and I pulled my fair share of all-nighters and caffeine boosts to keep up. With how poorly the live view videos did overall, it was definitely not worth my time from a financial standpoint, and I don't know if I can afford to do something like this again without co-streaming rights, which is highly unlikely. My computer also crashed near the back end of the tournament, and I ended up missing 2 full days, including upper bracket finals, which was devastating because that was the series I was looking forward to the most. My own positives and negatives out of the way though, this tournament was definitely up there as one of the better tournaments Ligas had to offer. The format is fantastic, one of the best we have, although I'd still give LPL playoffs the edge format-wise, and I feel like a lot of the teams showed up big time. G2 smacking top esports in 3, TL putting up a really good performance against T1, and my favorite series of the entire tournament where PSG almost knocked BLG to the lower bracket in some of the craziest games I've ever seen. I think I enjoyed every single series of MSI 2024, a feat that not many tournaments in any sport have for me. With all of that base stuff out of the way, I can talk about my impressions on all the players and teams. I did this part unscripted because honestly, I tried to script it and it just didn't feel supernatural. I figured just pulling up my graphics and talking about it would be the best way to convey my feelings on everything, so here you go. Basically, I'm just going to go over the teams and players, what I had before the tournament, what I have now that the tournament's concluded. This was my team tier list before the tournament started. Gen G, BLG, T1, Top Esports, G2, nobody in C tier, then NA, Fnatic, PSG, Loud, GAM, and Astral. We have a few changes to this tier list. After the tournament, my tier list would look something like this. Keep in mind, this is not where I'm tier listing the teams. I don't think FlyQuest is a D tier team. That's not what I think. I think FlyQuest had a D tier performance at MSI, is what this means. We've still got Gen G and BLG at the top. I contemplated for a little bit putting Gen G in their own tier because they did go 6-2 against BLG. But honestly, a lot of those games are pretty close. Like if you think about it, Gen G did end up winning game 1, but they were down 4K, Dragon Soul. It was definitely not easy. Game 2, they had a massive lead and almost threw it because their comp was terrible. And then game 3, BLG won. So you know, there's probably a different universe out there where MSI was literally just a 3-0. Where BLG just 3-0s Gen G and calls it a day. I'm not going to put Gen G and BLG in separate tiers. T1, G2, Top Esports. Something else that people may consider is moving Top Esports down to B tier. They did get 3-0'd by G2 after all. But I think they played well enough against everybody else. Like they took Gen G to 5 games. That was a pretty impressive series, even if Gen G wasn't quite warmed up yet. PSG I have in B tier. If you only looked at their record, it might not seem like that because they got knocked out by a 3-0 to G2, but they played BLG to 5 games, they got out of play-ins, they beat FlyQuest. I feel like PSG did everything they needed to do to prove that they were definitely a real contender and better than I thought they were heading into the tournament. Good enough, I would say, to put above TL and Fnatic. I highly doubt either TL or Fnatic would be able to put up anywhere near the kind of performance PSG did against BLG. Then in terms of TL and Fnatic, the only reason, TL did beat Fnatic, and then TL also had the very impressive 4-game series against T1. In my opinion, it was impressive. Even though TL ended up losing, and a few of those losses were throws, they had favorable game states in a lot of those games, and at least 3 of them they had a favorable game state at some point. And then I've already talked about Fnatic before. I feel like Fnatic has a lot of potential moving forward. They have a good eye for what their comp is supposed to do, what their win cons are, when they're strong and when they aren't. They just need to figure out how to not run it down randomly in mid and late game. But they definitely have a better understanding of how to actually play around comp identities than teams like Team Liquid or FlyQuest, or maybe even PSG, for example. D tier, I've got FlyQuest. They went 2-3 against PSG and got knocked out of play-ins. And then I guess the only other hot take I have with my updated teams tier list is that I have Loud over GAM. You cannot convince me After watching the Loud versus Gam series and what Loud did to top esports, you cannot convince me that Gam is a better team than Loud. They played better than Loud on the day, yes, but if Loud and Gam played 10 games, I'm pretty sure Loud would win like 7 or 8 of them. I just think that Loud is a better team. Like in the series, they handedly stomped game 1. They were stomping game 2 and then had an Astro throw. And then game 3, their mentals were completely shot and they just lost. Whereas on the flip side, Gam looked pretty disastrous in like every other series, but I did move up Gam to D tier because 1, they beat Loud, and 2, I thought that Kiaya and Levi both had decent tournaments. Then I left Astral in F tier. There was also debate like, should I move Astral up to D tier? They did have a decent showing against T1 for what it is, but I feel like that was more of T1 just kind of fooling around, and I don't think anybody on Astral necessarily had a good tournament apart from maybe Cody. Alright, let's go to players. So these were my players ranked before MSI started. I'm not gonna talk about this whole list. I've already talked about it in depth. I spent 2 hours talking about all of these rankings and what I thought about all the players heading into the tournament. A few things that I feel like I got right that I was really happy about was Junjia performing, Betty performing. I think a lot of people were lower on those 2 players specifically heading in than they should have been, and they did end up showing up, so happy to see that. There were definitely a few stuff that I got wrong, though. There were a few things that I completely whiffed on. So I have my updated player rankings list, which I also cleaned up. It looks a lot cleaner, because if you remember from the players video, it was this list, and then I had a separate chart that had all of the tiers that the players were in. This time I just combined it into one list, so this is how I thought the players did post MSI. Again, this is not what I think the players are tiered. I don't think Inspired is a C tier player. I think Inspired is like a B tier player with an A tier ceiling. What this chart means is that I think Inspired had a C tier showing at MSI. Just gonna make that very clear so people don't freak out. The big elephant in the room, I think, is none of the bot laners being in S tier. Personally, I think that every single ADC showed up way worse at this tournament than they did domestically. There are some excuses, I guess. Like with Elk, you could say that he was sick because we saw him throwing up on stage. That was why BLG paused one of the games. Or you could also say, hey, you know, Elk, Jackie Love, and Guma are all very aggressive ADC players, and at the back end of the tournament they were forced onto Senna, you know, like that kind of stuff. But in general, I feel like a lot of the ADCs underperformed. You have Elk losing lanes to Betty, Jackie Love losing lanes to Hansama, Guma being stuck on Senna duty for half the tournament and not looking super great in those games. There were some Senna games where Guma looked really good. I'm just saying that there were also a handful where he was pretty invisible, so I really don't think any of the ADCs showed up that hard. Then also, something notable from the ADC column, there might be some people who would say that Paze and Hansama should actually move up. I don't think so. Yes, they did have some standout games if you don't look at what was actually happening in them. So for example, Paze had the 28 bomb on Callista. How could you put Paze in B tier? He got 28 goddamn kills in a game. That was less because of Paze and more because of the terrible comp that Gen.G had, combined with how much better they played during the early stages of that game. Gen.G pretty much had a pick comp with Blitzcrank, Zac, Sejuani, Yone, and Callista. And the only consistent damage in that comp, because Paze went lethality Callista, so the only consistent damage in that comp is Yone, BLG, perma-ganked mid early, set Chovy super far behind, so the Yone's invisible. So essentially, you have 4 champions that don't deal damage, and a Callista, and the entire team comp hinges on getting a pick with CC. Paze was pretty much just being spoon-fed kills by Keen Canyon and Lehens all game. He really didn't do much. I would say that from an outplay perspective, he probably got maybe 4 or 5 of those kills himself through skill. Everything else was pretty much handed to him with a blitz hook or a Sejuani ult or a Zac engage, something along those lines. And then as for Hansama, yes, Hansama and Mickey did beat Jackie Love and Mako in lane 2 out of the 3 games. Game 3, Hans actually did lose lane. He did pick Draven, he did get the cash in, he did get a triple kill in a skirmish, but they were 2v2 killed in that lane, so Hansama and Mickey, they beat Jackie Love and Mako in 2 out of the 3 lanes. Okay, my problem with Hansama is kind of twofold. One, I think that the lanes that Hansama and Mickey won were mainly because Mickey's just the GOAT. And 2, whenever Hansama didn't have a gold lead, he was invisible. And whenever he did have a gold lead, even if it was a gargantuan lead, it still never felt like you could breathe easy, because he had a lot of problems with team fight positioning and actually pushing his lead into anything meaningful other than just generic map pressure because everybody else can play around him. So I feel like Hansama still has a few issues that leaves him out of A tier, and I still feel like Pays was a little bit of a passenger princess, which is why I have them both in B tier. C tier, notably, both of the LCS AD carries I thought showed up pretty well at the tournament. I'm not as big on Jan's performance as a lot of people were. I know that he had a lot of games where he was the best or the second best performing member on the team. It was either Jan or Impact, because honestly, Umti and Core were just running it down the entire time. So yes, there were definitely games where Jan was the best performing member. Yes, Jan definitely looked a lot better at MSI than he ever did domestically, but I still don't think that Jan was ever playing like an elite AD carry. Like, he would have a lot of games where he would, for example, he would pick Lucian. He would be 3-0 or something. Pretty good scoreline, pretty decent team fighting. But the issue is that he was never actually piloting Lucian the way that you're supposed to be piloting it, where you compare it to an Elk, Jackie Lover, Gumi, Yushi Lucian, where every single time the culling is up and the objective timer isn't bad for blowing an ult, they would just chuck an ult mid, they would get pressure, blow summoner spells, get mid turret because of it. Jan would play very safe whenever he got ahead and would not look to push advantages and would not snowball as well as he could have. For those reasons, I didn't push him any higher than the top of C tier, but I do think Jan had a very good tournament, and I think he showed a lot of promise, and I'll definitely be more optimistic about him heading into LCS. Same thing with Masu. I felt like Masu really stepped it up. He was supposed to be one of the weak points for FlyQuest heading in, but there were some games where he was the strong point, same as Jan, where there were games where he was outperforming Whippo and Inspired. I think Masu should be very happy with how he played at MSI. The rest of FlyQuest, maybe not so much. The last big change that I made is that I did end up moving Easy Love from F tier to D tier. I think Easy Love did show in a lot of the games why I had him in F tier. His positioning was not good. He was dying a lot. He was losing a lot of lanes. He was kind of a Zeri one trick. But at the same time, there were also games where he was hard carrying. I think he had an 11 kill Zeri game. One of them was. You know, for that alone, I can't say that he had an F tier performance, right? Like, there were games where his team put all of the carry eggs in his basket and he managed to carry, so just giving him some respect points moving him up to T tier. Top lane, Keen, Bin, pretty self-explanatory. I think Bin did end up getting moved above 369 and Zeus. I think he leveled up over the tournament. The meta shifted into more of the Jax Camille kind of meta and shifted away from the tanks as we got to the back half, and that's really where Bin shined the most. 369 over Zeus. That's one that a lot of people might look at and be like, huh, that's odd. But that said, I went back and I watched all of the games that Top Esports lost, and 369 was the issue in a total of actually 0 of them. Like he actually was never the reason why they lost, and whenever they won, he was a big reason why they won. So I think 369 played super well throughout the tournament. He also just had some really strong games overall. I don't know, man. I still have Zeus in A tier. There's no disrespect there. I mean, like, I had Zeus in A tier before the tournament started. I think he performed about how I expected him to perform. The surprises for top lane are Broken Blade being in A tier. I genuinely do just think that Broken Blade played his way into A tier. He had some really strong games, especially there was a game where he went like 8-1 on Camille. Was super impactful that game. I feel like he got a lot of international confidence, and I think it'll translate well heading into Worlds. Impact I've got at the top of B. Impact was super solid all tournament, never really had a bad game, made a lot of super smart plays. The only issue that I had with Impact is that he may or may not have picked Cassante in like literally every single game. I don't think it was literally every game, but I know that there was at least one series where he only played Cassante for the entire course of the series. And so the game plan is pretty stagnant when you pick that champion. I mean, you get lane swapped on, you go bot, you try to suck up melee minions, you get dove under turret and die, you TP back, you get dove again, maybe you survive. Like, it's the same thing over and over again, so it's like, you know, I don't think Impact necessarily had any huge carry performances that nets him in A tier, but I thought he was very solid. And then the other two top laners in B tier, Ozzy and Oscarinin, they were also both C tier on my initial tier list, but I thought they had B tier performances. They really stepped it up from what they were showing domestically. Oscar was more of a we knew he had it in him all along because of that rookie debut, the 3 weeks that he had, where he played like shit in the first week, okay in the second week, and then really well in the third week. So we knew that Oscar had it in him to play well. I think he definitely did play well at this tournament. Big confidence boost picking Camille into 369 and performing. Definitely was fun to see. As for Ozzy, that guy, I don't know what happened. I don't know what he was drinking or smoking, but he went from I'm gonna pick a tank, go down 1000 gold and team fight later, to literally just carrying his team in like half of the games. In the series against BLG, in my opinion, Ozzy was the best player on the team in that series. And he had some crazy outplays too throughout the stage of the game, whether that was outplaying dives on Udyr or Cassante. Like, there's one that I remember very specifically where he was being 4-man dove, I believe it was on Udyr. He just ticked over to level 3. He had an option of pressing double R and clearing the wave and dying, or pressing double W and trying to outplay the dive. When I was watching it, I was like, man, Ozzy, you really need to press double R here so you can clear the wave and get as much XP as you can before you die. This madman used double W, dodged everything, leveled E, like stayed alive long enough that he ticked to level 3, leveled E, got the stuns under turret, and he stalled so much time that his team got a massive topside advantage while he was being dove bot lane, and it was super impressive. And he did that like he had similar dive outplays like that, like at least 3 times. And then of course you have the highlight clips where he's like buffering Knight's flash engage on Azir with Cassante ult, like all this crazy stuff. So I think Ozzy definitely deserves to be moved up. Nothing else really to say about top lane. Going into jungle, I talked about this already on stream yesterday. I think Shun was the best performing jungler across the tournament. I think Shun was also the better performing jungler in finals. I think Shun played better than Canyon in 3 out of the 4 games. Game 1, Xin Zhao versus Karthus. It was pretty much a handshake. That one was kind of just laner diff for BLG until it wasn't and the Karthus scaled. So we'll give it to Canyon on that one for just having a really nice pick. Every game apart from that, Shun was kind of running Canyon around the map. He solo carried game 3, almost solo carried game 4. Like, he was just playing absolutely crazy. There was the series against T1 where he picked Nidalee against Owner's Xin Zhao and had an absolute clinic early game. Some of the best early pathing I've ever seen, got a massive advantage. Shun, throughout the course of the game, would do one of 2 things. He would either pick a facilitating jungler and do his job to a very high level without making any big mistakes. So he would pick, he'd pick Sejuani, he would gank a little bit, get his team some advantages, press R later, get his team picks, win the game, whatever. Or you would put him on a carry, and he would absolutely obliterate the other jungler. And now, Canyon and Owner did do that a little bit, but not to the same degree that Shun did. And I also feel like there were games that Canyon and Owner played where they would pick facilitating junglers and kind of run it down. The only performances that Shun played that I was not impressed with were his Wukong games. Everything other than that, I thought he just did a really good job. Canyon and Owner, also S tier, kind of speaks for itself, I think. If you go into A tier, yes, I have Junji over Yike. I thought that if you exclude the G2 versus PSG series for a second, I thought that Junji played a phenomenal tournament, really showed up against every single jungler that he played against, showed why he was on EDG. I still think that if Junjo went to an Eastern region, he would be an elite level jungler in no time, at least top half in either the LCK or the LPL. I think he would be top 3 to top 1 in LEC or LCS. Whereas on the flip side, Yike definitely played well, but there were also games where he was completely invisible. Like, for example, that first Lilia game that he played was not good. I also think that Yike had the benefit of all of his lanes stepping up. All 3 of his lanes stepped up and really performed, whereas Junjia was stuck with Maple, who was underperforming a bit. Well, I wouldn't say Maple was underperforming. I would say Maple was performing about how I expected him to. And then, you have Woody, who's actively running it down and trying to lose the game intentionally. The fact that Junjia can still make it work with significantly worse teammates is what impressed me. Then, if you look at the PSG versus G2 series, because, to be fair, G2 did 3-0 PSG, so I was like, in my head, I was like, you know what, I'll go back and rewatch the series. If I think Yike genuinely out-jungled Junjia in that series, I'll move Yike above Junjia. Like, it's only fair, right? I went back and I watched the series, and it was actually just laner gap. Like, there's nothing Junjia could do about how badly his lanes lost, and there was nothing that Yike did in that series that made me more impressed with his performance than what Junjia was doing. Like, there were even games where Junjia was like picking Viego and still outperforming Yike in the jungle, even though his team was kind of worse on the day. Yeah, I've still got Yike under Junjia. Tien, also an A tier. A lot of people probably would not have Tien in A tier. They'd probably move him down to like B or C, because Tien has a tendency to kind of randomly decide to run it down anytime past the 20-minute mark for no reason. But I actually still have a lot of respect for Tien. I think what people miss about his playstyle a lot is that Tien is really, really good at getting his lanes ahead. Like, he's fantastic at playing around early pathing and where he needs to be on the map to make sure that his lanes that should be falling behind are going even, or that his lanes that should be getting an advantage do get that advantage. The entire tournament, I was watching Tia and I was like, you know what, this guy's actually playing really well, you know, before the 20-minute mark, and then after the 20-minute mark, we don't have to talk about what he was doing. So, yeah, I still got Tien in A. Notably, like, bottom of A. If you moved Tien to the top of B, I would have no problems with that. I think both LCS junglers massively underperformed. Umpty was actually sprinting it against T1. If Umpty played like a human being against T1, TL would have won that series. That's like, that is actually a hill I will die on. I also think that Levi played very well in his 2 wins against Loud and his game 2 against Fnatic. I thought that Levi was playing fantastically. I also thought that Jose looked very solid across the board. He was just kind of doing what he could with the pieces that he had. Mid lane, we've got Chovy and Knight. In third, I actually have Caps. I think for many people, Caps was the biggest surprise of the entire tournament. He looked pretty much as good as he's ever looked since like Worlds 2020. Like, I wouldn't say he's peaking or anything. I wouldn't say that he's back to where he was at like Worlds in MSI 2019 or Worlds 2018 or anything, but I would say that there's a case that you could make that he's about as strong now as he was at Worlds 2020. I guess there's also a case that you can make that Worlds 2020 was his peak and that the LCK was just better in those years. But either way, Caps is back. Looks way better now than he did the past few years. Looked super confident, was solo killing everybody. I think he really deserves to be S tier. On the flip side, Faker is not an S tier. I haven't done an A tier because Faker was actually a liability for his team the entire tournament. His champion pool was really a huge issue. I feel like it was made abundantly clear in a lot of the series that he could only play like 3 or 4 champions, and if you banned him out, he couldn't perform. He did get a few games where he was on those champions, where he was on the Orianna, Azir, and Talia, and when he was on his champions, he looked very good. And he also had one ASOL game that I thought he looked pretty good in. So I'm not moving Faker down to B or anything, but I can't allow Faker to move up to S when he's the sole reason why his team lost draft in multiple of the series. B tier, I've got Cream. I think you could make an argument to move Cream up to A tier. It's definitely true that he was being gapped by a lot of the top tier mid laners, but it's also true that he was holding his own against Chovy in the Gen G series, so I don't think you could say that Cream was a complete wash. It's also definitely not a Cream meta, so very unfortunate for him that it's more of a control mage meta. If top esports end up making Worlds, and it also happens to be an assassin meta where we get Yone, Silas, Akali, those types of champions mid, Cream will be a beast. And then Humanoid. I was totally prepared to slam Humanoid down to C tier, and I even made a remark in my player rankings video where I said that if Humanoid didn't perform at this MSI, I was kind of done believing in him, because there was always this narrative that he wouldn't perform in regular season and he wouldn't really show up in playoffs, but then when it really truly mattered, he would become a beast. And for a while it was true. Like, he played super well at Worlds in like 2022, even though Fnatic didn't have the best performance. Like, Humanoid played very well in that tournament. There definitely is some validity to the idea that Humanoid turns it up a notch when it comes to internationals, but for the entirety of 2023, it felt like even when Fnatic needed him most, he wouldn't show up. And I was starting to get to the point where I was like, okay, if he's not gonna show up when it matters for multiple years in a row, maybe he's actually just washed. Turns out, no, he is not washed. He was picking LeBlanc and styling on everybody. It was actually really fun to watch. I still have faith that if you give Humanoid super high agency champions, that he can get stuff done when it matters again, so he's in B. C tier, the only things to really point out is that I think that Maple played about how he was supposed to, Jensen played about how he was supposed to, and APA played about how he was supposed to. Tinones and Cody both outperformed my expectation. I thought that Tinones looked really good against top esports, and I thought he also looked pretty solid against GAM even though they lost. And I think that Cody was kind of the shining beacon for Astral in both of their losses, where he was holding his own, still finding picks, still making plays. One of Cody's biggest issues at past internationals was that he just could not keep up in lane, but I thought that he actually did a pretty decent job this time. So I moved them both up to C tier. Tinones only over APA because I thought that Tinones looked really good. I don't actually think that APA like performed badly or anything. Emo's in solo D tier, not because I think that Emo's bad. Again, he's only 18. He never even got a chance to play in the VCS before he got subbed in because of the match fixing scandal. Literally this split, he qualified into the VCS. He didn't even play a single game. He played the qualification tournament and got in. Never played a single game. Match fixing scandal happens, and he just randomly gets subbed in for like finals. He's super fresh. I think he's got a bright future. He definitely had a rough start. I think he got solo killed like 5 times on Tristana in one of the games, but near the back end of the tournament, it felt like he was more comfortable, and I think he'll be good. And then the last role to go over is support. I think, in my opinion, supports by far across the board were the best role at this tournament, although it comes with a little bit of an asterisk because I think the top 6 supports and the bottom 6 supports, that there was a massive, massive gap in between them. That's why I have no B tier supports, because I genuinely just think the top half supports were so much better than the bottom half supports. It looks like Busio's at the top of C. Oh, that must mean that Busio was the 7th best support, like he earned being the 7th best performing support. Nah, Busio did not look good. The only reason why he made it up to 7 was because Core JJ was sprinting it. Like, Core JJ put up one of the worst international performances I've ever seen from him. So that moves him below Busio for me, even though Busio didn't necessarily perform that well himself. I debated putting Woody into C tier because near the back end of the tournament he was performing a little bit better, but I just can't get over the fact that Woody was actually inting multiple of the games for no good reason. Woody's my GOAT though, best player in the world. Going to the top half of the supports, I think that Jun really proved to everybody why he was able to hold his own in the LCK. The Renata especially, he looked really good on. But I think after this tournament, everybody's definitely, for anyone who was still skeptical about Jun in the LEC, which was honestly the minority, like by the end of LEC, but there were still people who were like, man, I don't know how good this Jun guy actually is. Is he worth an import slot? Is he actually going to elevate our team internationally? Yes, Jun will elevate your team internationally. Keria, I'm leaving in A tier. I don't necessarily think that Keria performed badly. I thought that he especially looked good on Ornn. I really liked his Ornn. But there were definitely some games where he was put onto Nautilus or Alistar, and he just wasn't performing on the Engaged champions as well as he should have been. So, leaving Keria in A tier. On the flip side, I'm actually moving Mickey up to S tier. I thought that Mickey was crazy this tournament. I thought that all of G2's lanes were crazy this tournament. I think that the reason why G2's bot lane had so much success against the Eastern lanes was because of Mickey as opposed to Hansama. Mickey was literally shaping the draft in some of the series with his Poppy support pick. Like, he would pick the champion, absolutely smurf on it, all the other teams like had to ban it out, and he still had plenty of champions that he could fall back on and perform on. Which is really impressive, because usually when you get bans, it's because the team that's banning you out thinks that you can't play anything else. It's very rare that a team will ban out a player because they think that the player will just smurf on the pick if they get it. Some examples would be Chovy always getting the Asol and Corki bans, or Knight always getting the Ahri ban. Mickey getting the Poppy ban was the same way. Teams were banning it out because they genuinely just thought that if Mickey got Poppy, they would lose the game. Whereas like on the flip side, you have the normal examples, like Faker, where you ban out his Talia, Orianna, and Azir and he has nothing. Or maybe somebody like APA, where like you ban out his Ziggs and his Asol and he has nothing. You know, those kinds of players. So I think it's totally fair to have Mickey in S tier. I also thought that Mako and On played very well across the tournament. The games where the LPL bot lanes looked like they were floundering, in my opinion, it looked more like it was because Elk and Jackie Love were just having bad games as opposed to On and Mako doing anything wrong. And then of course, Lehen's up there at the top of support. I mean, maybe it was debatable between Lehen's and On before finals, but Lehen's was definitely the better performing support on the day in finals. And I did some thinking about it. Initially, my first reaction when I finished finals was that I wanted to give my personal finals MVP to Canyon. Even though I think Shun outperformed Canyon in the jungle, I think that Canyon was the main reason why Genji won some of the games that they won, and another reason is that I thought that Canyon still looked really good in Game 3 when they lost. The fact that he picked Lee Sin into Tahm Kench, his team fell super far behind, and he was still finding reasonable plays to try to get his team back into the game is absolutely insane to me. Like, Lee Sin should be unplayable from that position, but he was still finding ways to get in and like find decent kicks onto On. Or there was one play where he was literally just standing there in the faces of like 4 people on BLG, and he still found an angle to ward hop, smite, kick Elk into his team, and he ended up getting Elk's flash for it, and he didn't even die, and he didn't have to flash himself. And it's like plays like that, I'm just like, man, this guy is insane. Like, he's so good. But after thinking about it a little bit more, I do think Finals MVP was probably just Lehen's. He was performing in every single game, and he single-handedly won them game 2, actually. Lehen's Finals MVP. In terms of who I think was the best performing player across the entirety of MSI, I would have to give it to Shun. I mean, I think Chovy looked really good, obviously, but Shun, to me, kind of elevated himself to a point where I'm like, wow, even though this guy is super young, he's probably just one of the 10 best junglers the game has ever seen. At this point, I probably even think he's better than Kanavi heading back into the LPL. This MSI, I really paid attention to the early jungle pathing much more than I ever have in other tournaments. And in doing so, watching Shun's pathing was just so insane. This guy, I think he might even have a better idea of how to path and when he can invade and which camps he should start on when. I think he has a better idea of it than like even Milky Way, which like going into the tournament I never would have said that. Like, but I actually just think it's true. It's probably still true that Milky Way has a higher ceiling than Shun, and that he has more of an X factor, and that he's better at carrying, better at fighting in teamfights and whatnot. But in terms of early pathing, at least, I was just super impressed with Shun. I thought you put him on a facilitator, he gets the job done. You put him on a carry, and he's just demolishing everybody else. For me, Shun was the most impressive player of the tournament, even if BLG ended up losing. Yeah, that's pretty much everything I have to say on the teams and players. Finally, for those curious, this is everything I predicted and my total hit rate. I also included which teams I was cheering for, since some people find that interesting. I'll leave this up for a few seconds. And with that, that's everything I have for you for this MSI. I'm undecided if I'll be live viewing Worlds or if I'll just go back to my old format of predictions and pre-tournament rankings only. Let me know what you guys preferred. I stream on Twitch sometimes and also have a Discord server. Links to both will be in the description. I also have a Ko-fi page, and any tips are highly appreciated. Thanks for watching. Bye!